May 1st, 1945. Berlin. The Reich Chancellery bunker. Soviet artillery is close enough to shake dust from the ceiling, and the war has already killed roughly 60 million people. Inside that concrete box, Joseph Goebbels is still Reich Minister of Propaganda, still performing loyalty like it's a job you clock into. And then, in the middle of the collapse, his 6 children die. After that, one story says he sat down and played solitaire, like a man trying to pretend the universe is still obeying rules. How does a human mind get to that point? Why would a father choose the most final act imaginable, a ding, and then reach for a card game? What you're about to discover explains how fanaticism turns into a domestic crime scene, how a regime trains people to fear life more than death, and why Berlin's final days produce decisions that still feel unreal. But first, you need to understand what Joseph Goebbels actually was and what the bunker was doing to everyone trapped inside it. Goebbels wasn't a battlefield commander. He didn't win wars with tanks. He won wars with sentences. For 12 years, he helped build a system where language became a weapon, where enemy meant subhuman, where defeat was rewritten as betrayal, where murder could be marketed as necessity. That's the difference. When your job is to bend reality for a living, the end of reality hits harder. Now zoom out. Berlin in late April 1945 is not a capital. It's a pocket. A city under siege, gutted by bombing, choked by refugees, cracked by hunger, and ringed by an army that has been fighting for 4 years with revenge in its blood. Millions of civilians are still in the wider Berlin area, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers, Volkssturmmen, exhausted Wehrmacht units, teenage auxiliaries, are being fed into a defense that can't work. The Soviet assault on Berlin is measured in days, but the death inside the city is measured in hours. And underground, in the Führer bunker complex, reality gets smaller and smaller. It becomes corridors. It becomes air filters. It becomes rations. It becomes whispers about who's leaving, who's staying, and who will be blamed when the door finally opens. April 30th, 1945. Adolf Hitler is dead. That single fact detonates the bunker's remaining logic, because for Goebbels, Hitler wasn't just a leader. Hitler was the proof that the world made sense, a chosen man, a destiny, a story that justified everything: mass arrests, concentration camps, total war, final solutions, the whole machine. So when Hitler dies, Goebbels doesn't just lose a boss, he loses the plot. And here's the catch. Goebbels could have left. He had status, he had connections, he had the kind of name that opens doors in a dictatorship. But the war is over, and now names don't open doors. They close them. If Goebbels escapes and is captured, he doesn't get treated like an ordinary prisoner. He becomes a symbol, a trophy, a trial, a public autopsy of the regime's lies. And Goebbels understands something most people avoid thinking about. He understands that he can't talk his way out of a reality he helped create. Compare that to the world outside the bunker. Outside, people are trying to survive. They're not debating ideology. They're scavenging water, hiding in cellars, searching for food, praying the next shell lands somewhere else. But inside, the bunker is still running on ideology. That's the difference. Inside the bunker, every hour is a referendum on loyalty. If you leave, you're admitting the story was fake. If you stay, you're proving you believed it right up to the end. So Goebbels stays, and he does something even more revealing. He becomes the regime's successor for a moment. Named Chancellor in Hitler's political testament, a title that is already meaningless because there is no Germany left to govern. It's a crown made of ash. Now zoom in on the family. Goebbels and his wife Magda have 6 children in that bunker. 6 kids with matching names, clean hair, rehearsed smiles. The perfect propaganda family for a perfect propaganda state. Those children are not just loved ones. In Goebbels' mind, they are proof. Proof that the movement created a new world. Proof that the sacrifice was worth it. Proof that the future belonged to them. And now that future is outside the bunker door with a Soviet uniform on it. This is the part people miss. When a fanatic faces defeat, the fear isn't only punishment. The fear is meaninglessness. If the Reich collapses, then every death demanded by the Reich becomes pointless. Every speech becomes a con. Every sacrifice becomes a theft. And if you're Goebbels, you can't survive that psychologically, because he didn't just support the regime. He authored it day after day, sentence after sentence. So the bunker becomes a pressure cooker for one final idea. If the Reich dies, then the children cannot live in a world without the Reich. That's not a normal parental thought. That's ideology invading the home and occupying it. Now, there's a common temptation to treat this as monsters did monstrous things and then move on, but the real lesson is worse. Monsters rarely think they're monsters. They think they're consistent. They think they're protecting something. They think they're preventing humiliation. They think they're choosing honor over shame. And in the bunker, with the city collapsing, with Hitler dead, with no escape that doesn't end in capture, that logic tightens like a trap. But here's the catch. Goebbels was also a performance animal. He lived for the audience. Even at the end, he wants the story to land. He wants the final chapter to mean something. So he frames the ending as loyalty, as devotion, as a refusal to live in a defeated Germany. And that framing is poison because it turns murder into theater. Now, what about the Solitaire? You'll hear it repeated because it's the perfect image. Cards on a table while the world burns, a man trying to hide in a tiny ritual after crossing a moral event horizon. But whether it happened exactly that way or not, the point is this. People in extreme collapse reach for normal actions like lifelines. They smoke, they drink, they straighten papers, they argue about etiquette, they play games, they do anything that makes the brain whisper, this is still a day like other days, because the alternative is to feel the full weight of what they've done, and most minds can't, so they compartmentalize. They shrink the world to something controllable. 52 cards, a predictable shuffle, rules that still apply. Now zoom out again, because the personal horror makes more sense when you see the strategic landscape. By late April 1945, the Reich is a map of broken arrows. The Western Allies are in Germany. The Soviets are in Berlin. The Luftwaffe is a ghost. Fuel is scarce. Ammunition is rationed. Command structures are shredded. And yet the regime still talks like victory is possible, because admitting defeat would collapse discipline instantly. That's why propaganda doesn't stop when reality contradicts it. It becomes more aggressive, more absolute, more moral, because the lie is now holding up the ceiling. That's what Goebbels built for years, and now he's trapped under it. So when Hitler dies, Goebbels faces two futures. One, capture, trial, humiliation, and the slow public dismantling of the story he sold to an entire nation. 2, a chosen ending, quick, controlled, symbolic, where he gets to write the final line. And that changes everything. Because once a fanatic believes the ending is part of the message, he starts sacrificing reality to polish the message. That's how domestic life gets dragged into political theater. That's how children become props in a finale. And that's how a man can tell himself he is protecting them while doing the opposite. Now let's talk about the bunker environment, because it matters. The Führer bunker isn't just a hiding place. It's an echo chamber with no escape from itself. The same faces, the same rumors, the same air, the same shrinking options. Above ground, the world is ending fast. Below ground, time warps. A day becomes a week. A rumor becomes a command. A fantasy becomes a plan. And everyone is watching everyone. Who's panicking? Who's defecting? Who's packing? Who's writing letters? Because in a collapsing dictatorship, the last currency is loyalty. Goebbels' entire identity is built on being the pure loyalist. The man who never wavered, the man who stayed when others hedged. So he makes his final stand not on a bridge, but in a narrative. He refuses evacuation, he refuses compromise, he refuses any ending that would place him in a courtroom answering questions like, "Would did you know?" Because that question is a trap. He did know. He helped make it happen. Now, we need to be careful here, because this isn't a sensational story about how the children died. It's a story about why, about the mechanism, about how a worldview can become a prison that convinces a parent that death is mercy. That's the difference between a crime and a political religious ritual. And Goebbels' worldview has several key pillars. First, the outside world is not just hostile, it is corrupt. Second, defeat is not just losing, It is annihilation. Third, the enemy will not just punish you, they will erase your meaning. Fourth, living under the enemy is worse than dying. Fifth, the children, as symbols of the future, must not be owned by the enemy's world. Put those together and you get a logic that can justify anything. Now zoom out to what was happening in other collapsed regimes and cities. This pattern isn't unique to Berlin. In many collapses, the final moments produce family annihilations, suicides, and extreme acts that are less about fear of death and more about fear of shame, fear of retribution, fear of loss of identity. It's not rational. It's ideological panic. And in the bunker, panic has nowhere to go, so it turns inward. Now, here's the part that makes Goebbels especially chilling. He wasn't ignorant. He wasn't confused. He was an intelligent man who could read the room of history. He knew the Reich was finished. He knew the Soviets were at the door. He knew there would be accountability. And he still chose an ending that maximized symbolism. Because he believed symbolism was power. That was his profession. So even in collapse, he reaches for the tool he trusts, the narrative. Now, if you're still with me, I want you to answer a question. If you were trapped in that bunker, hearing shells, smelling smoke, knowing capture is coming, what would you do with your family? Would you gamble on survival and let the world judge you? Or would you choose a controlled ending because you can't bear the unknown? Drop where you're watching from in the comments because people from different histories feel this question differently. And subscribe if you want real history, systems, and consequences, not movie myths.